The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. Introducing Sine Institute 2022 Fellow Mustafa Santiago Ali.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sine Institute and to our seminar series. This is our sixth seminar. We've been working on the fight for environmental justice and climate justice in the 21st century. We all know how incredibly important that is. We went through the history of the environmental justice movement. We have talked to frontline leaders on the positive actions they've been implementing on the ground to address the change that is necessary. We've talked to business leaders and a number of others about how we make real change happen. How do we help our most vulnerable communities move from surviving to thriving? How do we move past trauma to transition and transformation? In our sixth series today, I am so incredibly blessed because we are focusing on the next generation of 21st century leaders. Many of them, just like yourselves who are sitting in this audience and who are watching across the country, you play a critical role in making change happen. You know, there's a famous quote that says, history has always been shaped by the power of youth. Sometimes we forget the power that we have to make transformative change. Sometimes we forget how incredibly important it is to hear our own voices, our own sets of experiences as a part of the solutions that are critical. And sometimes we think, well, I'm just too young to actually be a part of that transformation. All of those things we are going to unpack today, and we want to share with you young leaders who are playing a critical role in helping to point us toward that North Star that we often talk about, which is justice. How do we address the environmental injustices that are happening? How do we address the climate crisis that we're currently dealing with? How do we make sure that we're playing a role in the policy space to make sure that we are anchoring how change will happen? So we're going to dive in deep today because we have the folks who know how to make it happen, and they're going to share their wisdom. Sometimes we think wisdom only comes from our elders. And yes, there's a lot of wisdom that's in that space. But I'm one who believes that there is also wisdom in the leadership that many young people have across this country. So we're going to navigate together as we take these steps in unpacking. So let me just call out who we have with us today. I also want to thank, because I may not get another chance, I want to thank the amazing, incredible young leaders and the students who have made this series possible. If you've played a role, I would like to ask you to just stand so folks can see you. And Matt, don't be afraid to stand. See, lots of times you think the person who's in the spotlight is the one who's actually doing the work, and it is incredible folks who have just helped to build this infrastructure that's made us so successful. With that being said, I'd like to turn and introduce Karina Newsome and ask Karina to just share a little bit about who she is the work that she does and the organizations that you come from.
Well, it is truly an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for inviting me, and it's an honor to be able to sit with and learn from these incredible leaders by my side here today. My name is Karina Newsome, as Mustafa mentioned, and I am the brand new Associate Conservation Scientist at the National Wildlife Federation. I started a week ago. Right there, Dr. Don Cantor. So thank you for coming.
We've met in person.
And so my background is in biological sciences. I study wildlife in particular, birds specifically. But while science has always been my passion from the time I was a very young child, growing up in the context of poverty and also in a thriving Black community, I began to, first of all, live the intersection between the way that natural resources and lands and air and the resources that we need for survival are managed and how it's impacted or managed differently for those of us who lived in impoverished areas. And so as I've grown up, then as I got into my career, I realized that there's a really massive intersection here. And as we're kind of navigating problem solving for some really urgent, large scale problems, particularly when it comes to wildlife conservation, how are we problem solving, or how can we problem solve in a way that is centering the needs and perspectives and leadership and knowledge of the communities that are already most impacted by the climate crisis and other environmental crises, because we can problem solve in ways that hurt those communities, or we can problem solve in ways that uplift them. And so that is what my career and my life and vocation are centered around. And I'm affiliated with the National Wildlife Federation, but I also sit on the steering committee for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, which I'll touch on, I think, a little later, as well as Skype the Scientist, which is a science communication organization. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That's the amazing Karina Newsome. I want to pass the mic to the powerful Justin Pearson.
You're very kind, and thank you, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. We got to know each other over Twitter, and you're just as amazing in person.
Yes, sir.
I truly am humbled and honored to be here with Corina and also with Alaura, who I've gotten to know over the movement and the struggle that we've been in Memphis. I serve as the president and founder of Memphis Community Against Pollution, and we were formerly Memphis Community Against the Pipeline. And that was because two multi-billion-dollar corporations decided that communities, Black community in Memphis, Southwest Memphis in particular, was not valuable. In fact, they called the community the, quote, path of least resistance. And from October 2020 through July 2021, we mobilized a significant campaign to understand the effects of environmental racism and environmental injustice, which are new words to me, much, much older to the folks that I am around and I've learned way more about. And we galvanized and organized a movement in Memphis that made people's land and water and the air that we breathe central to the work of our communities. And so now we have a nonprofit, obviously, that's doing this work, but we also have a council pipeline that is not going through Southwest Memphis today. In Memphis, and it was, as I tell folks, it was a whisper from a freedmen's community of Boxtown that became a clarion call for justice that got folks in the environmental justice movement from Dr. Ali all the way to Danny Glover and Vice President Gore and Reverend Dr. Bishop Barber involved and invested in a way that we could have only dreamt to happen. But it taught us a lesson that when folks choose a social location with people who are excluded and who have been marginalized historically and systematically, change is possible. And justice, this North Star, is actually achievable. And so by continuing to center our communities, but also bringing more people into the work who otherwise wouldn't be, is actually creating power in places that have been disempowered. No place is voiceless or powerless, but they've been disempowered. And so I'm really fortunate to be here and to learn more than anything amongst you.
Thank you so much, brother. We appreciate that. Y'all can give him a round of applause. Now I get to turn to my sister, the transformational Alaura Carter.
Salutations, everyone. My name is Alaura Carter. I'm from the DC area. I work for the Climate Reality Project as a program manager for a special program called the Climate Speakers Network. I get the wonderful opportunity to work with communities, organizations in the US and a little bit internationally to do work around climate and environmental issues, whether it's education, whether it is workshops and trainings about how to put together a great climate event, how to get your message out there, how to tell your story about climate, how to figure out how to get funding to do your work. I've gotten to work with so many wonderful communities throughout the US. I've gotten to work with a lot of wonderful faith communities, you name it. I like to think my work is, I try to keep my work as intersectional as I can. So working with different communities, not just in the environmental space, but we have so many social justice causes out there. There's not really a reason why we should be working together. So trying to work with the housing community, homeless community, immigration community, you name it. Climate connects to everything we do. So doing that work. I've got the opportunity to probably spend more time with Mustafa than most people in the room. So I've gotten to just glean everything he shared with me along with the others who I get to, the other wonderful leaders like Dr. Adrienne Hollis, Miss Bernice Miller Travis, who also poured into me. I guess my start to environmentalism was a little bit odd. So I grew up in the DC area. My grandfather and I used to watch Discovery Channel all the time. That's what I love. I've always loved science and history. And I got into the thing of saying, this is cool. We should do something about it. And then in college, it just kind of clicked that this is what I should do. I just started with joining the FAMU Green Coalition. And it went from there to, let's get a full-time person to help recycle on campus to, okay, let's go into the community, get people to understand that they want to build a biomass plant next to an impoverished community, next to a school, and down the street from a hospital. And from there, I've gotten the opportunity to work for several nonprofits, just doing work around education, around working with communities and getting them not to understand what's happening to them, because I think a lot of them know, but I won't say I think, a lot of them know what's happening, but how can I be a resource to you to get to where you need to be? So how can I help with making sure, you're aware of how you can use NEPA to your advantage? How can I help you maybe get some funds, different things like that? And so, I haven't been able to stop a pipeline and I haven't been able to get people more connected to nature, but I'm trying one thing at a time. I'll get there.
You've helped. You organized a call for me to do.
I'm here to be a resource in any way that I can.
Yes, thank you very much. So let's set the stage. We have 200,000 people who are dying prematurely from air pollution every year in our country. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from car crashes. More people are dying from air pollution than are actually dying from overdoses of drugs. We got 24 million people who have asthma, 7 million kids. 1.2 million people in our country have suffered from lead poisoning. Trillions of dollars were disinvested from Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. All of these are connected to policy and the decisions that folks make about whose life matters, which locations matter. And we have an opportunity and a responsibility, both in our education and in our sets of work in the moment and in the future, to begin to not only unpack, but to begin to rebuild, to find ways of pulling people together and to build coalitions. And I want to start at coalitions because we often think, well, it's that smart person at the top of a government agency or on the state level who's a driver in what happens. They play a role, but it is the grassroots, it is frontline organizations and communities that are actually marshaling the individuals. There are two types of power in our country. Money, we live in a capitalistic society, and we just have to understand that that's a dynamic. The other power is people.
Yes.
These individuals have played a role in being able to marshal folks together. So Karina, since you're looking at me the most intently, I'm gonna come to you. To talk about, because you've done an amazing job. People often talk about your social media presence, which is impressive, but social media is not the only part of the equation. It plays a role. Talk a little bit about how do you organize? How do you pull people together? You build bridges in an amazing way. How do you do that? And then Justin, I'm gonna come to you with the same question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for that introduction and for the question. So for me, I think the foundation of most things, whether it's organizing, coalition building, moving people, or moving ideas forward, so much of it is rooted in relationship building. And no matter how small in scale, whether it's geographic or number of people, or large in scale, the effort is, sometimes it's 3 people, sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of people But the key is in some way being able to build relationships with individuals. And I think in my work, the way that I've been able to kind of build bridges. And one thing that I'm always committed to is that if I have been given access to a space of power or an individual with power, my job is to bridge that person with power and the power that they have to the communities that I'm connected with. And so most of what I do and aim to do is, okay, I'm building relationships with the communities that are most affected by whatever the particular subject matter might be. I live in Atlanta, Georgia right now, and a lot of the work that I do is actually around environmental education and wildlife conservation and connecting people with the outdoors. Building relationships with people to understand what is their already existing relationship with the outdoors, right? Because I think one of the downfalls of a lot of efforts have been the assumption that, you know, communities that are frontline or fence line communities to some of the environmental issues are uneducated. But as Alaura was saying, like, we know what's going on, we know what's up, right? So it's not going into educate, building relationships, understanding what their priorities are, how they're already organized around an effort, and then connecting those people with the people that I'm connected with that do have power. And part of that also is being able to have like cultural competency that not only, you know, allows me to engage with my own community, but to then take what I know to be true of our communities and bring it to different spaces. And I have to say that most of that has been rooted in the fact that I'm able to uplift the stories of other people, but using our stories, using our realities, our narratives, to be able to move our efforts forward in relationship. And when there's relationship, the reason why that's so key is because accountability is like the fabric of it. When I'm in relationship with someone or with a community, the decisions I make or the moves that I make are ones that I have to then return to that community and hear their feedback and understand whether or not what I'm doing aligns with what they've asked me to do or with what their priorities are. And I think that when it comes to building movements, you can make big mistakes if you are operating out of relationship with people and with communities. But when you are intentional to set that and position yourself to be accountable, that is the way to go. So I feel like that takes me in so many different directions. That's what I think about right now.
That's all right. We're gonna come back and get some more from you. I know you got some more sauce for us. Some of y'all will get that a little bit later.
You catch it on your way home.
Yeah, Justin, you know, we're at this moment, was the 50th anniversary of Clean Water Act. We also know that when it comes to Black and Brown and Indigenous and lower wealth white communities, we are often the locations where people will place the least desirable things that they don't want in their communities. In your work around the Byhalia pipeline, very difficult work, but much needed work. How were you able to organize? Walk us through that process of holding a movement together until you actually are able to receive justice.
Yeah, it is the most rewarding and most difficult thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And it is still extraordinarily rewarding and still the most difficult thing that I am doing. So there's one element to this, which is like we are people, right? And when you are a person who is called or has chosen to be in some position of power or authority over a thing, it is this accountability in relationships, and it's a lot of pressure. I love these talks. Now that the pipeline's been canceled, we get to have other types of fights and conversations. But when you work like 100-hour weeks for real, and like it's 4 hours of sleep because, you know, it's Mr. Clyde Robinson and the Scotty Fitzgerald's land is at stake, and you got to go to court, and your city councilors or county commissioners might sell land to a multi-billion-dollar pipeline company. The type of pressure is unlike anything I've ever experienced, and it is equally because hold yourself to a high standard, but then there are people who count on you. And so when we talk about justice and these movements that we've been witnessing, the folks who are doing marching and leading marches and putting themselves out there, and I know many of you are those types of people, is an important recognition of like there's a cost to this, and not allowing the glamorous parts, I will say, right? Like having Vice President Gore and like all these things, which I celebrated, which were amazing for our community, to overshadow that a lot of folks lost a lot of sleep and got sick and like continued to learn all these other things. Okay, so let's start to the work. There was no way we were going to win this alone. In October 2020, the project had already been moving forward for 2 years. From everybody, I was in Boston, Massachusetts. I had no idea. I came home during the pandemic, learned about it on Facebook from Kathy Robinson, who became one of the co-founders of MCAP. Like, didn't know what was happening, but they were moving ahead with this project, right? The community that it was in had been resistant. They've been telling the state representatives and city councilors, we don't want this, stop this project, do something, and we're being ignored, right? The places that have been historically disempowered are the places that these corporations go. They become the sacrifice zones, right, of our society, not because the people are resisting it, but many of us have become accomplices to the injustice because we've stopped caring. We have agreed that there are certain people's lives who matter less than other people's. And so the fact that there's, in our community, our neighborhood, the cancer risk is 4.1 times the national average, right? Both my grandmothers, God rest their souls, died of cancer in this very community. So you're talking about these 200,000 people who died prematurely, they died in their 60s. We're deciding whose lives are valuable. And they are policy decisions, but they're also culturally conscious decisions we are making as people with privilege or people with means to say, like, I don't see it, and so I don't have to care about it. And so what does coalition look like? What do we do? After talking with the neighborhood associations, 3 in particular, Westwood, Boxtown, West Junction, and Walker Homes Neighborhood Association leaders who had been arguing, had been sending the emails, right? But again, they hadn't been listened to for years. They haven't been listened to for decades, let's be honest here. It was like, okay, I got some privilege, right? I went to a fancy little school. I know a couple of people and I got a little time, right? Don't have any kids, don't have all these other things that like y'all got going. And as one person said, we held the pipeline company off until the cavalry came. And we understood that after listening to our elders, like they were tired. And they've been fighting for decades injustices. Like folks are tired. And so me, in some form, I think within the social context of summer Black death, within the social context of a pandemic disproportionately killing Black, African American, Indigenous people, people of color, it was like this moment where this was the act, right? This was in essence, I don't know how spiritual folks are. You get this, like, this was an act of repentance to a community that has been ignored, right? This is an act of repentance to my own neighborhood, right? That I hadn't really been to or invested in or cared enough about, right? We organized with the people who were at the fight first, and we realized that we weren't going to win alone, right? We would just be Black folk making a lot of noise. And even in a city that's majority Black, the power structure in America skews toward wealthier people and white people. So there were other environmental groups and organizations that have been around for a little bit longer, that were literally 100% white, that had access to the information and the resources. And so the forging that was actually most difficult was we have this, it was very clear, this would be a Black-led movement. And y'all are all supporting staff to what Sarah Gladney and Clyde Robinson, and Scotty Fitzgerald, and Mama Easter Knox, and Bassett Booker, to what they need and what they want. And in our country, telling people that we're about to usurp power in the way that they understand it, to center the people who are most marginalized and excluded, was new. But it works if we're going to build what Heather McGee, the author of the Some of Us, call the solidarity dividend. Because it is the solidarity dividend that breaks the system, right? It's what made it very difficult for the pipeline company to fight back. Because they were like, what is happening? It made it really hard on mayors and county commissioners. They was like, wait, rich white people and poor Black people like are coming to us with the same script about what justice looks like. And so by doing that, which is hard work because it is different than our status quo, we were able to build power. And we're continuing to do that. I'm not saying it's easy, but by doing so, it is continuing to allow our community's voices to be heard in rooms and in places that we otherwise would not have been able to access, like chambers of commerce or the mayor's offices, right? Like this is an essence, this is how we will win.
Excellent, excellent. And I want you to understand the significance of the work that Justin and the community did there. There are over 2 million miles of fossil fuel pipeline in our country. It's enough to go to the moon and back a couple of times. And we are now in a moment where we see what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, and folks are now saying, well, maybe we need to drill more. Maybe we need to raise up the amount of natural gas and oil to be able to balance out these political dynamic things that are happening on the international level. That all ties into the policy work that many of you are focusing on, but we often don't make the connections of what's going on. So I raise up the work of Justin and the incredible folks there because they were going against, decades upon decades of history of people just putting the pipelines through. Whether we're looking at Keystone or we're looking at a number of these other pipeline battles that have been going on, for them to be able to find a formula and to build the allyships, to be able to find traction, positive movement, and to set a precedent. We often hear about precedents in the law. I teach a bunch of law classes. We often refer to the precedents. They set a precedent of how to move forward and how to make change happen. That's why y'all should be clapping. Now, I turn to my sister, Alaura Carter. Alaura talked a little bit about climate reality. I want to ask you the exact same question because Alaura is humble, but from her college days to Sojourners, to the work at Climate Reality, can you talk about the paradigm that you operate in pulling people together and finding opportunities for them to be able to make sure their voices are heard?
Yeah, so as Mustafa mentioned, I've gotten to work with some wonderful people. Working with communities, they always need resources. One of the top ones is money. Unfortunately, I haven't always had money to give. I still barely have it now sometimes, but pulling people together can happen in a number of ways. Being a resource can happen in a number of ways. I happen to know someone who knows someone most of the time. So I'm always happy to say, well, if you want someone to talk about this or you need help with this, let me call around and ask and see if I know someone. And Mustafa will tell you, I've texted him. If Dr. Hollis were here, she would tell you, I've texted her like, hey, I know someone, they need help with trying to do this thing around a water issue in their community. Who would be an expert to speak on this or be a part of this? Also being resource is highlighting what they're going through, and not in a sense of also, highlighting it in a sense of we can do an article, we can do a video, but highlighting it to people who really don't understand how close they are to the issue. In our work with Climate Reality, we have these huge leadership trainings all over the world. And we had one in LA a few years ago, and we were talking about some things that were happening in the Oakland area around incinerators and the things they're dealing with in that community, which is primarily, I want to say, Black and Latino, and probably what middle income to lower income. Don't quote me on those figures as far as income, but talking to people and building coalition, I was making the point of, if you live in San Francisco, you're what, maybe 20, 30 minutes away. Where do you think your trash goes? It's going to their community. And you may not think it's a problem, but it's happening to them and you're 20 minutes away. You should be concerned about that. Drawing the connection of highlighting what people are going through in a sense of, this may not be a problem for you because you live here in a nicer part of Miami or Boca Raton, it's beautiful. You do realize the sea level rise is going to come up the coast and come in further. So you're not concerned about the community that's living on the coast and what they're going through because you live in $1 billion home. It's coming for you eventually. Now, it might take a little longer than what you think, but it's coming. And then I would see people's mind click of like, wow, you are right. I'm not far from this community in Miami that has, high, the tide is high. In the community, in the streets on a regular day with no rain. I'm about 20 minutes away from there. In another year, I won't be no longer 20 minutes away. I'll be 5 minutes away from the water coming up out of the sewers and damaging my home. And so, coalition building or just being a resource comes in so many different ways. Even, like I said, we can do things through traditional media. My organizations have the opportunity to make great videos, to leverage, our founder, former Vice President Gore, to go to places to kind of highlight what they're going through and finally bring attention to communities that have been ignored. Ms. Catherine Flowers, who's doing great work in Alabama and other parts of the South, she's been working on this stuff for years, sleepless nights, giving her all with other community members. And, I won't say it took Mr. Gore or others coming, but, it really, was an opportunity for people to say, wow, Catherine's been busting her behind for this many years and people haven't been helping her. Let's throw some money in her. Let's get some resources to her. And, my org and some of the work I've been able to do, Mustafa's been a great help in that as well, is highlighting what they're doing and figuring out the best way to be a resource and making those connections between where someone is and what someone's going through who lives down the street. Don't ever think that a climate catastrophe is so far away from you. I've always been one to say, I live in the DMV, I love it here because we don't get hurricanes, we don't get tornadoes, we don't get floods. We're in this little weird area where we get very few effects from things that happen to us. And I've always figured myself very fortunate to live here. But at the same time, I'm, as we've seen with this new IPCC report, I am maybe 10 years from having my home flooded, no matter where I live in this DMV area. In parts of Southeast DC, they're experiencing flooding every time it rains heavy. So today, right now, it might be flooding in parts of Southeast DC, where the majority of the community is African American and of lower income. We had a tornado maybe 5 or 6 years ago that came through actually near the grocery store near my house. And I've always said, oh my God, tornado came through here. That's how serious it is. So making that connection between people who really don't think that climate, environmental justice issues or climate issues are, it's over there. It's not here. No, it's right here. And it's coming for you sooner than you think. And your money and your privilege will buy you about 5 more years than everybody else, but you should still be concerned because it's coming for you no matter what you do. You can't escape what Mother Nature has for us.
Right now.
Yeah.
I want to take us a bit deeper. And here's the paradigm that we're going to operate from. How many folks know who W.E.B. Du Bois was? Oh, look at American University. Go ahead with your answers. W.E.B. Du Bois once said that a system cannot fail those that it was never meant to protect. All right. So we're going to unpack that in a whole bunch of different ways here. And Karina, I'm going to come to you. And one of the students actually wrote this question that I'm going to ask. As a woman of color in academia and the STEM field, what sorts of challenges have you seen stemming from a lack of diversity and representation? And that's the reason I asked that question from W.E.B. Du Bois, or the framework.
Yes, thank you for that question. So one of the ways that I like to frame the conversation around diversity is kind of taking a biological lens to it. So if you're a scientist, a biologist, a geneticist, even someone who works in the biological sciences field, we understand that in particular in the context of conservation, where you're trying to protect diversity, we understand that diversity is literally the bedrock of what we do and trying to maintain it and maximize it, right? And the reason why that's the case is because, especially if you think of genetics, when you have populations of people or organisms of any kind, and everyone is exactly the same, nobody's genes really has the answer to a diversity of problems. And so if there's a threat that comes through, whether it's a disease or some sort of environmental issue of some kind, if one is susceptible, they all are. Nobody's genes has the answer to the problem at hand. Diversity, especially in the context of people, but also in genetics, allows you to have the capacity for problem solving in the way that you need it. It increases your resilience, or increases your ability to address whatever issues are coming your way. And in the context of thinking about systemic issues, ones that are literally built into the way a system functions or an entity or an organization functions, it is critical to be able to have people from diverse perspectives almost in those systems in order to even be able to detect the ways in which it is intentionally failing communities. And one of the ways that I regularly see that, so thinking about STEM and academia and things like that, from even the really micro levels, right? So say you're a Black aspiring biologist, which was me, right? You show up to South Georgia, you're from Philadelphia, from the north, you show up to South Georgia, rural Georgia, right? The professors in the department where you've now enrolled to go to school, because they have not kind of been subjected to the threats that you would be subjected to as a Black woman in the place where you're doing your research, collecting your data, they are completely unaware of the kinds of issues that you're about to face, and they send you out, right? Send you out into the woods, into the marsh, wherever it might be, and you're suddenly without support, and they had no idea that support was even lacking, because there's no one in the decision-making space, there's no one in the department, in the school, to be able to even catch that systemic issue, right? So that's a very kind of micro experience, but one that really ends up shaping a lot of young biologists, Black biologists, biologists of color, brown biologists. And then when you scale it up and you think about, and so again, in my context, like wildlife conservation, right? Oftentimes, almost in the name of urgency, and granted, climate change and acting on climate change and environmental issues is urgent, but in the name of urgency, people forego relationship building. So this is kind of pulling this back in. They forego relationship building with the communities that are most impacted by whatever the threat might be, because we got to do it now. The time scale is short. We have to hurry up, right? But when you do that, of course, you again miss or perpetuate the ways in which the system intentionally hurts people. And so in my context, one thing that I see frequently is that when you have threatened or imperiled, we'll say, populations of a given species in an area, and this has happened multiple times. One of the most recent ones was actually in Everglades in Florida, where there was like a handful of individual birds that are of an endangered species, and they chose to change the water regime in this particular part of the Everglades to create the ideal habitat for this particular kind of bird, meanwhile flooding out the land of indigenous peoples and Miccosukee who live on that land, right? And they're sitting there with their literal, the land they live and work on is covered in water in order to protect this like handful of individual birds, right? And these decisions, again, being made because what else are we going to do? Had you had diverse perspectives, problem solving around this, you would have been able to come to solutions that benefited birds and people, as opposed to being kind of reactive and saying, oh, we've flooded out your entire community, what do we do now? And so when we kind of continue to maintain these homogeneous spaces where people are having to make decisions about any sort of issues, we do ourselves a disservice, because it is very unlikely that we'll have the creativity that we need in the room to be able to account for those issues. And then the systemic nature of it means that it will perpetuate and it will get worse as the environmental issues or whatever the issue might be that we're facing gets worse. And so diversity is critical just for our ability to even problem solve in the way and at the level that we need to.
Thank you for that. Justin, the system cannot fail those it was never meant to protect. You said in a quote of yours that stood out that without just laws, we will not have justice. What sorts of legal and legislative solutions do you see for environmental racism at the local, state, and federal level?
Yeah. Did I say that?
You said it.
Watch these quotes. I'll come and get you. That one sounded all right, though. I'm just so grateful to be surrounded by y'all. I'm learning so much, so I'm taking notes because I got more lessons to do. The point is, the laws that we currently have, the policies that currently exist, are the ones that are killing people. And they're slow lynchings, is what I call them in our communities. We saw for 9 minutes, 29 seconds, Mr. George Floyd's life be taken from him, right, by these 4 police officers. And everyone was in an uproar because we had to witness it and we watched it. And it was this particular amount of time. But there would be 3.2 million more Black folks alive today if we had the same life expectancy as white people. There's something killing us. And it is decision-making, it is laws, it is the history of redlining, which is the decision of government to determine who lives where, which just so happens to be the same map that industry uses when they determine what goes where. Right? Like, so if we don't have more just laws that at their core think about the communities that have been marginalized and that have historically borne the burden of environmental degradation and environmental pollution for decades, if we don't have people in positions of power, new leadership, people in positions of power who are having a different perspective about what it means to create communities where people can thrive and include their voices into decision making and not make decisions for people because you think you know what's best for them, right? Like we create something that's very different. And again, this is antithetical to what we have been taught. This is like not the way that things are supposed to go, right? Like the smart, the rich, like that have made it because because of the meritocracy, like they are the ones who are supposed to be the decision makers because they went to these schools, and that means that they know what is best for Boxtown and Westwood and indigenous communities, right? And instead, what more just laws would do would say, who's going to be impacted? Let's hear from them, and let's have them influence the decisions that we make. We are not there yet. Right now, we're still in a situation where a lot of lobbyists seem to have more power than people do. A lot of really wealthy donors seem to have more power than millions of people in the community. But like, there's reason to have hope. And we saw it in Memphis. So after the pipeline was canceled, we didn't stop, right? We worked to pass 3 laws to protect our aquifer, which is our primary source of drinking water. Serves over 1 million people across 6 states. So we passed laws to protect our drinking water that said, if you have these hazardous materials, you need to get approval from us. You can't build it in certain places and all these things, right? And so we took what you articulated very well, people power, and said, we'll put our people power up against you all's economic wealth and power. And one thing elected leaders love more than anything is to get reelected. And if you get enough people together, making those phone calls and those emails, you can actually influence legislation. And then we saw our white state legislature try and preempt that. And so again, through unlikely allies, we got white folks who are more conservative. We tweaked our arguments and we're like, look, let's see where we're the same, right? And what we're fighting for. Use that to take a horrendous bill, make it bad, but protect some of the laws that we passed, right? Like the people are the ones that should shape legislation. And when we actively work collectively against these more powerful companies, actively work collectively against these powerful companies, we actually can see some victories.
That's powerful. That is powerful. I don't know about y'all. When I close my eyes and when I hear Justin speak, so I work for President Obama. I hear President Obama.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's the Black church.
We both understand that. Sister Carter. System cannot fail those that it was never meant to protect. In November, you wrote on the Climate Reality Project site about your experiences at COP26 and the lack of diversity there, and specifically that people of color are disproportionately impacted by climate change, but were seemingly left out of that conversation. You posed some hypotheticals at the end, and I'm just wondering if you have ideas on how vulnerable communities can be included in these international conversations like COP26, now COP27 that's coming up.
Yeah, COP26 was an amazing experience. I have not gotten the opportunity to leave the country that much. And so going to Scotland was definitely an eye-opening event. And it was wonderful to meet a lot of people there. We got to talk with the US envoy. So we got to meet with some of John Kerry's people. He even gave us a quick wave and hello, nice to meet you. But while I was there, I noticed that there were not a lot of people who looked like me. And when I say look like me, I didn't see a lot of people who were African-American or maybe Latino or Indigenous or any other ethnicity that were actually from America. Now, every country was represented you think of, met one people from different countries, but the US team was a lot of people who were white. And it just shocked me because I'm like, America is everybody. It's everything you can think of. It's people from all over who've come here, thousands of years ago, who got here, maybe a year ago. So why is the US, one of the superpowers of the world, why is the team making decisions for what we're going to do going forward to keep the Paris Agreement, to reduce our emissions? Why is everyone on the team not as colorful as the rest of the US? I mean, even in the DC area, you can walk down Connecticut Avenue and you can go to 5 different restaurants from 5 different countries. So there's no excuse about not being able to find anybody. Yeah. I mean, we could leave right now and go get some Afghani. Okay. It's delicious. So why are you not, everyone's not there? And this really, it was the people from John Kerry's team, very nice, very respectful. But I was just kind of like, where are people that are Black, Latino? And I'm not saying there was no one on the team that was that. I didn't see everyone, but from who I saw walking around, it wasn't that. And so it just shocked me because I was like, we're here, people should be doing more. And even looking around, I met one of the young ladies who was African-American. She was like, oh, hey, what's up? I found you. I'm like, where have you been? I've been looking for you since I got here. We didn't even know each other, but we were just so happy to be in connection. She's like, yeah, I'm from California, I'm here. I'm like, I'm from DC. We were just so happy to be in connection. And so thinking about that, why weren't any of us there? Why did they not have more people of color from different communities there? Are we taking our input into what's happening? And so I think it's essential that when we do international work, whether it is on a governmental, with the State Department or whomever, or whether it's even state or even, governmental or even NGO with organizations that have international reach, you've got to include communities of color. You've got to include them and their opinions and their voices. And you've got to bring them to these places. People may say, well, we invited someone from, Reverend Woodbury's community in Florence, South Carolina to come and speak at this thing, but nobody came. Do you think that they have, $1,000-something to get a ticket to Scotland to just show up and have hotel fees covered to be there. No, you have to think about how you're going to include them and not just have them there at the table to just be there, but let them express themselves and their voices. And I think that a lot of our international work, the US, we make a lot of different things, and we make a lot of things about what we are doing. But, I want us to, it would be nice to see how they can set up a process for how to bring vulnerable communities into conversations. Of course, we want to fly everybody around the world. Of course, we want to do different things, but what are you doing intentionally to make sure that you are including the voices of communities that are marginalized, and not just bringing them along to share their sad story about living in a environment that is unjust, but bring along their solutions too. There's so many communities, Mustafa can tell you much more, who have great community solutions. They've gotten grants for $5,000 and they've turned it into a resource center, a scholarship program, a daycare center. They got nature walks going on. And that's just for environment. That's not counting, the other issues they're facing. So why are you not bringing their solutions to the table? I was happy to see, the White House, their committee on dealing with environmental justice and the Justice 40 projects, which I'm hoping go well. But are you bringing everybody in, not the people who are known, but those who aren't very known, and bringing their solutions to the table as well? And so, COP was a wonderful experience. I love to go back, but I also want to see COP27 where, maybe the pandemic was an issue this year, but where you're spending, you have the money, it's there. There's no excuse for no one not having the money. It's there. We can spend money for war. We can spend money for a lot of other things. Fly them out, bring them there, have them at the table to give solutions. Don't just say, well, thank you, we'll take this into consideration, but make sure they're a priority and what they have to say is duly noted and brought into the conversation. Because, Mustafa can tell you as well, the amount of work that these communities have done with no resources is amazing. And you can literally apply half those principles to what we're doing internationally. And, America really can't say, we're doing this for everyone, but you've got a bunch of people who come from wealth, come from privilege, are good, mean well, but they honestly don't know what someone who's living in, Oakland is going through. They don't know what someone who's living in, parts of Charleston where it's flooding every day and there's coastal erosion is going through, and they can take their considerations, but they really need to have them actually there making their voices heard. And, they need to, I'm on the tip of my tongue, but we need to just figure out when we do more international work, how are we including them into not just the conversation, but into the solution process as well. Because I guarantee if you brought Reverend Woodbury and John Kerry, he'd have about 18 different ways to solve the climate crisis. Now, can all of them work? No, but I guess at least 6 of them will work out of the 18 for sure.
Not a doubt. What I want to do now is I want to turn to the audience for questions because we are family and this is an interactive session. So just raise your hands. Please stand up so folks can hear and project because what you have to share I know is important.
Okay, so my name is Keyshawn Pearson. That's my brother Justin. I was literally just saying what's up to him. But I will also just pose a question that pertains to, I'm the project director for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. We just recently held an event at the National Press Conference that illustrated how poor communities were 2 times as likely to die from COVID than any other population group. And just to elevate and affirm what you were saying previously about how affected communities had the intelligence, they have the wherewithal, they have the actual on the ground knowledge of what works best for their specific communities. Right now we're in West Virginia where there is a power plant where they create environmentally sensitive insulation, but they use a system that is environmentally degradatious to the community. And it's a mile away from an elementary school. So you see the pollution on one side and the elementary school is here. So I guess my question would be for you all, in what ways do we bring in those people who are on the ground and elevate their ideas?
Maybe we'll keep them concise. Karina, go ahead.
I would say that in the context in which I work, I use the privilege of my education, which has given me a lot of technical knowledge in, my particular field, which tends to be wildlife conservation and management of, imperiled species, to kind of undergird the already existing knowledge of the community and so that there's language that can be used to convince the polluters or the decision makers or whomever it might be, and in my context, people who are making decisions about wildlife that end up hurting people. Because a lot of times there is this assumed ignorance of the community and like trying to beat around the bush with jargon to kind of sidestep their knowledge and ultimately thwart the efforts that they're trying to organize around. But I try to position the education that I have, the language that I have, to be able to talk with both audiences to kind of bring forward the solutions that the communities and the concerns the community has already. So that would be my answer.
There it is. Just
Great. Yeah, it is proximity. So it's going inside of communities that folks tell you not to go to.
Yes.
It's talking to people that we've been told you shouldn't talk to because they're not interested, or because this place is dangerous, or those folks don't have. So I think there's a part of this is proximity. The other is if you have the privilege of the language of those who are in power, of those who created the system, you translate the language in order that people can understand it, in order that they can then fight right with you. We got people who are 60 and 70 years old talking about environmental racism and environmental injustice. Somebody came to a rally and he said, the more I learn about environmental racism, the more I believe it killed my mother. And then on a sign, right? But these words we didn't have until 18 months ago. And so how we translate that matters. And then we close the information gap. And so to use the information that people have that we are coalition partners with, or that we learn ourselves, that professors have, and then bringing that into communities in a humble way. Not that there is a deficiency with the people, but there has been an intentional miseducation, uneducation, disempowerment of a lot of places. Because once you learn your power, you can do something about the conditions that you're in. And it is systematic to deprive people of that.
Yeah.
Laura?
I would say a lot of us have the opportunity to be in a lot of spaces that other people don't get invited to. So when you're there, speak up. If you get a lead, follow it. When you're talking about in West Virginia, if someone says to you, hey, they're doing a city council meeting about this, you should show up to the meeting. And then when they're asking for comments, you say, did you call so-and-so and them down the street and ask them what they thought about this? And bring them up and call people out. There's a way to do, you don't have to go crazy when doing it, but I've had the opportunity to be in meetings and they've been discussing about, well, we want to do this and we're going to work here. And I said, have you talked to this person? Well, who's that? Okay, I'll tell you who it is. I'll set up a call for if you like.
Yeah.
And use your privilege and your time in the moment to call them out and make sure someone's invited and say, I got the opportunity to do some work with a city council member here in DC. And I said, well, you're going to work in Northwest. You need to be working with these people. You need to talk to the Black churches. Oh, we're planning on doing it. When are you going to do it? You need me to set up a call for you? I can set up a call for you in about 20 minutes. What do you want me to do? And so use that time to bring the community in by calling people out. And even if you don't know certain people in the community, find a link. Say, hey, they're doing this. I know you're not familiar with me, but I want you all to be aware of this and show up to these meetings. I'm happy to go with you. I'm happy to go there and not act a fool for you, but to get a little rowdy for you if I need to. But use your time to be in that space where they're intentionally leaving some of these communities out, because a lot of these meetings that are happening are intentionally done at certain times, certain places, to make sure that we can't show up. They are done in the middle of the day when everybody has to work. We had a city council meeting at 3:00 on a Tuesday. Why weren't you there? Everybody's at work and we're not there to speak up. So call people out and say, you all are dead wrong for having a meeting at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday when everybody's at work, and make them feel bad and say, moving forward, you need to have this person in the room. And then call the person and say, I want you to show up to this, bring them along, show up at places they least expect. I've unfortunately confronted people at restaurants and said, this is who you need to meet. She's in charge of this community trust at the daycare center. You should be talking to her about what you want to do, and letting them, share their thoughts. And also being helpful with those in communities who may be a bit shy or always feel like, I'm not as educated as someone else, so I don't want to speak. And maybe, helping them out with putting their speech or their presentation together, or just saying, what, education matters not right here. Degrees matter not in this space. Say your piece and get it across to them so that they know you're a concerned person and you have thoughts about this and you should be a part of this process.
Can I say one thing? Everybody ain't at work. Some people's job is to be there, influencing the people we elect.
Mhm.
And some privileged people can be there. So we work with some old, white, retired people, great people up, who care about justice. Y'all need to be there. Because people who are low-wage workers can't, right? There's no room on the bench for anybody in this decade in particular, in my opinion, as we look at the climate crisis. But it is to get some of these people who actually have privilege to take off work because your job is real flexible. You're probably a little more senior, and who are white to do something. Like, stop asking people who are most negatively impacted to always march, to always protest. I literally had a Black leader tell me, they were like, the marches have gotten more white. I said, this is good. We tired.
Yeah.
We've been marching. We've been advocating. We've been talking a long time. It's time for y'all to do something, because it is us, and it will always be communities of color and poor communities that are most impacted, right? Most negatively impacted. But it hurts everybody.
Yeah.
And it's time for people who, within the system as it is currently constructed, who can show up to those places and spaces while we pull levers to change it, to do and to show up and to be present and to be there. So if that's your parents or your grandparents, tell them to come on. It's work to do.
My grandmother says that you have power unless you give it away.
Yeah.
I think I probably would add that you have power and privilege.
Yeah.
What you gonna do with it?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. We family, this is all love. By show of hands, how many folks in this room have worked in Ward 7 or 8 in Washington, D.C.? All right, so we've had 3 people out of the set of folks who are here. Everybody read W.E.B. Du Bois. You have to put into action the changes that we want to see happen. I know it's not always easy. We got some busy, folks are busy, but folks living in the communities are busy. They just don't get to escape 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Dealing with what's going on.
Yeah.
So we have to use our power and our privilege to make sure that we're making the change that we all say that we want to see happen. And the reality of the situation is, yes, Christine, please stand, is that we cannot win on climate change unless we win on environmental injustice.
That's right.
It is impossible to do. Anybody tells you different, tell them, give me a call. We can all sit down and I'll break it down for them. Christine.
Yeah.
I don't want to mock any speakers, but I'm wondering, as we start to invest in communities that have historically been disinvested in money and resources, how do we make sure that those spaces aren't gentrified and they're not, like, people aren't being displaced from their own communities?
Just one great scholar named Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jukes, who some of us have heard of. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and she does a lot of academic work, but on the ground work around this very issue where, people, various kind of resources, financial resources are being invested in, say, green space and parks, or in natural infrastructure, or in beautification in some way, and then cascading effects, green gentrification or gentrification of some kind. And one of the worst things we can do kind of in organizing and decision-making is to work as individuals or in silos, because that siloed structure means that we're not, first of all, meeting our maximum capacity that we could, create together if we were working side by side and hand in hand. But one of the tangible ways that this kind of manifests is that when housing is not working with the Parks Department, who's not working with the community leaders who are living there, and you're not building in before the decisions are made, before the investment is made, before any money is moved, building in the structure to secure the place and the position of the communities who are legacy residents, people, especially Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, and low wealth communities, and ensuring that in structure, so on paper, literally on paper, that they are going to receive the maximum benefit from the decisions that are being made, and not being barred off from the benefits because they've been displaced by a lack of attention to the structural issue that is designed to hurt them. And so I want to lift up, and I would encourage everyone here to look up Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jukes' work. She is an incredible movement maker, community organizer, and is having ripples internationally. So I'm going to lift up her work.
Yeah. Did you want a piece?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then also look at the work of Harold Mitchell at Spartanburg, South Carolina. Look at the work of Miss Margaret May in the Ivanhoe community in Kansas City. Look at the work of Carolina Martinez and Diane Tagvorian in National City in San Diego. There's differences between San Diego and National City, even though they're right there together, and the amazing work that they have been able to do. Look at the work of Reverend Floyd Flake in Jamaica, Queens. Look at the work of Reverend Buster Soares in Jersey City. And look at the work of New Bethel on the south side of Chicago. Reasons that I add to the incredible information that Karina just shared with you is that when you look at all of these examples of how folks were able to revitalize their communities and their areas, there was intentionality from the beginning in making sure that folks will not be displaced. So they work to build, codes into the existing laws to be able to deal with the tax increases that will happen, to be able to make sure that seniors are protected, to be also thinking critically about what are the economic opportunities that we need to anchor in our community so that folks can have the jobs that are necessary so that they don't get displaced. It goes back to early and often engagement and making sure that those voices and solutions and ideas are built into the process at the beginning to minimize the impacts of gentrification. I know we are running short on time, but this is the first time we were able to be live. So I'm feeling it and I'm good. And I want to see if there's one last question from the audience, and then I'm going to have a closing question for the panelists. All right, it's not that often. Yes.
Hi, I'm Amy Dacey from the Sine Institute. I guess I have a question because we've also got a lot of people joining us online too and wanted to hear from your experiences. It's amazing to see what incredible work you're doing now, your position now. What was that first step you took? Because a lot of our community that's watching today, they haven't taken maybe that first step yet. They don't know how, they're maybe intimidated. Like, what's that first step to get you toward, working and change and doing the incredible work you're doing?
Alaura?
First step, just joining an organization. In college, I knew I wanted to be active on campus in some way. I didn't know what. I mean, I'm sure many colleges like this one, there's 1,000 things you can join, from sports to academia, but just finding an organization and joining it. I've joined the Family of Green Coalition, and like I said, it started with something very simple and it went to community activism. So joining the organization and honestly finding a mentor.
Yes.
Someone to kind of guide you, even if you have a little bit of interest to a lot, there's always someone who you can ask for advice and they'll say, well, maybe you could do this, and then you can go a little further, And I think my professor at school, Dr. Lorraine Nellen, she was like, if you all want to do this, I have more you can do. We were like, okay, let's do it. And she really pushed us. And even now, as I continue through my work, from my first internship to where I am now, there's always been someone that can kind of mentor me and push me. And, I know finding a mentor sounds easier said than done, but you'd be surprised how many people who are in the environmental movement don't mind giving you advice or helping you out or pushing you to do something. Mustafa, I call him, often, and he's like, oh, do this. Did you think about doing that? And it's a very simple thing. So joining an organization or joining a group and then finding someone to lead you or to give you a push, because there are many of us in the environmental movement. I'm sure the three of us, we're happy to find someone who's, I won't even say younger than us, who's just like, I want to help. What should I do? You want to help? You messed up now. Plenty of things for you to do. And also realizing that involvement doesn't require being a person on screen, shiny, saying the right things. There's so many ways to be involved. You can be helping out with just getting the word out by knocking door to door or at a community center. You can help with setting up tables and chairs. Even with younger people, I'm in my 30s. Social media is people who can make movies with iPhones and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and really get it out there. So involvement, you need to push. Don't think your push has to be, I have to now be, working for the Senate and doing things like that. Your push could be something as simple as going to the community center and they need help with community gardening, showing up on Saturday and helping gardening.
Yes.
So you can be shy doing that, you can be boisterous, but there's so many different ways you can be involved, whether it's you could be in the background, you can be in the forefront, but just realizing that you can be involved in just so many ways. Y'all know, I like to be in the background, you like to be in the forefront. I'm happy to let you go up front and talk, and I'm happy to be in the back sweeten out stuff that you're saying, but I'm still involved and I'm still doing a positive part towards the movement and what we're doing.
Definitely. And writing the talking points. So I don't sound, only reason I'm successful is because I listen to smarter people like Mustafa, Alaura, and Corina. I think I did not know that I would be this invested in the environmental justice movement. I had no clue. There was the green groups and things in college, but I suffered from the myth that this was a white people thing, right? It's white people hugging trees and doing stuff. And it's just like, y'all go do that. I got to graduate from the school though and hand my mom this degree because like that's my focus. That was my job, right? And it wasn't until there was this very imminent threat that I started to realize, oh, so the Valero oil refinery is a part of this that we grew up with down by my grandmother's house. It's like, oh, the steel plant that adopted our school. I got the award from the steel company my senior year that's pushing toxins into the air, right? Like, didn't make these connections. And so certainly didn't know that this would become the work that I would be a fortunate person to be a part of leading. And so for people who are looking for the thing, like I wouldn't say like you have to know what it is, because you want leave some room for God. Something's going to happen, and you'll be like, you know what? I feel really attached potentially to this issue, while at the same time, because now being a part of more social justice work, there are really amazing organizations, whether it's one of ours, the Poor People's Campaign, all these other ones that you can join and not just be a joiner, right? You get Facebook groups and all these things with thousands of people. But when you get down to it, right, it's like, it's a couple dozen who are persistently like, here's how I'm going to help. And I am fortunate, a lot of people say, oh, I got this master's degree and I want to help, or I did this and I want to help. And I'm just like, start by just making some phone calls. Get proximate to the work.
Yeah.
Right. And don't go in ready to run it. Like go in to do the really menial thing that like I also do, despite the fact of other perceptions, right? Like be willing to go and do the menial things. And if you stick around long enough, you actually build trust. And in my community in particular, it's very hard to build trust. And it's very easy to break it. And so it takes a minute for a person to come from the outside or other states who say, oh, I really care about that. Can I help? And I'm like, yeah, like, but I have to answer to Sarah Gladney. I got people to answer to. And so we can't just have anyone. So show that you're interested and show that you're invested by spending time doing the small things. And if you stick around for a couple months, right? People are like, oh, well, here, can you take that on too? You stick around for a few more months. And it's like, hey, can you take this on too? And you become more integrated into the movement that way. And you feel the familial connection of it, I think. What do you think?
The one thing I'll add, and this is exactly what y'all said was what I was going to say, just show up to the spaces. And even if it's not an organization that's organized around a particular issue, in Atlanta, we have like neighborhood planning units, NPUs, whatever your kind of like entity around which the community is coming together on a regular basis to talk about whatever is happening at that time. You are humbly learning about the context in which that community is living, organizing, whatever it might be, and then you build trust, and then you find ways to make the resources that you have access to available relevantly to that community, again, humbly so. And whether that's you have a car and so you can take Mr. Wilson to his eye doctor appointment, or that you understand the, you know, in my context, for example, when somebody makes a claim that, oh, we're gonna build this path or this bridge straight through a Black community park because bird watching, right? Like, no, I can call that out and be like, as a biologist, I'm telling you that you're going to be cutting down, you know, I can add my training, my professional skill set to be able to, again, back the community and just offer that to the ways that they're already fighting for the protection and resources that they are, that are compromised in some way. So I 100% second everything that Justin and Alaura have said as well.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Just remember that leaders are not born. This is not Europe in the 1500s and the 1600s.
Yeah.
They're made. And they're made through work, commitment, communication, and all the things that we know that create healthy and sustainable relationships. So with that being said, I want to close out, and I want to start with you, Alaura. What does the future look like? In 10 years, if you can look back, what does it look like in relationship to climate change, environmental justice, and the role that youth play in the decisions and transformations?
Yeah, so we've gotten a lot of bad reports, but there's still silver lining in the work that we're doing. So if you think about 10 years from now, I will say this, the youth that we have doing work are very active, and not just around environmental issues, but just social justice issues in general. We've used social media to some of our greatest advantages to get the word out there about things that are happening. We've seen youth just recently, I want to say Florida last week, they were upset about some of those bills that are being passed by DeSantis, and they all walked out of school and they made national coverage. And some people are like, they're just annoyed, but you know, that's a big thing to have 300 or 400 kids just walk out of school. It's not something that you should take lightly. And so I would say the future I see is definitely more youth getting involved, realizing their power, and not just in a presence of just being, you know, the busybodies on the ground, but their power in the voting booths, the power in them relating to their peers, their power and their influence upon people who are coming up in the next 10 years, who are, you know, folks who are 19, 20, who can vote and be active. We've got folks in middle school, high school who are going to be there soon, and them saying, my friend my neighbor who was in high school was always so activist. I love this. And so I definitely see our youth taking a bigger stride to do more for social justice. We see more of our youth connecting some different issues to environmental issues. So we see coalitions forming of youth who are saying, yes, today we're marching for climate, tomorrow we're marching for homelessness, next week we're meeting up again to talk about LGBTQIA issues all together. And so I see a number of these wonderful coalitions, a lot of youth pushing forward, and hopefully I hope to see a lot more youth in, as much as politics drives us crazy, a lot more youth in politics. And that is in the federal level and the state houses. A lot more youth who are saying, I'm running for a state representative seat, I'm running for county commissioner, I'm running for city manager, because they see, I've got to do something about the community I love or I'm now a part of. And I'm hoping we're seeing a number of smaller groups coming together now, but definitely in the next 10 years, seeing a lot more young people who are in their 18, 19, early 20s, who are, I don't want to say pushing people out, but, revitalizing some of the things that we're doing, having a bigger part in policy. When you think about policy, a lot of the laws and policies that were written, they were written 50, 60 years ago. Even before that, they were written when Black people were 3/8 of the person.
Right.
So I definitely hope to see more youth in these spaces of policy as well, and saying, when we wrote the Clean Water Act, we thought about it this way. Now we have to think about it a whole new way because we're running out of clean water. So we got to make things even stronger because we don't have any more clean water. We're running out of clean air. So we've got to totally, not take it away, but we've got to put better things in place so that you're not following some rule from 50 years ago or 70 years ago when there was Lake Tahoe was always the top. It's not to the top anymore. So definitely more youth being active and being more intersectional, supporting each other's work and saying, I'm standing for you, you're standing for me, we're standing for this type of thing together. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
So one of Dr. King's books, right, is The Fierce Urgency of Now. I am an eternal optimist. My faith calls me to have eternal hope, and my reality and lived experience, which we've talked a lot about here today, forces me to be realistic about our current situation. Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, it's a tome. It's 400 plus pages. But one of the key or central idea is that our capitalist system is antithetical to environmental justice and climate justice. The way that we are operating in an extractivist and an exploitative way of people and of the planet is not tenable. This will destroy us, operating in a way that lets these corporations write laws and pass them and then tell you if you protest against them, you are committing a felony, and so we're going to take your rights away. Right? This is what's happening now. And so we're seeing as these corporations in the last breath of the fossil fuel industry, right? Like they are trying to solidify power to take away democracy. And so over the next 10 years, my optimism is really from this social justice movement that I think has been realigned, and this racial justice movement that I believe was birthed out of the summer of Black Death in 2020. That energy for a lot of people was transformative. And so the conversations that are happening, I think for youth, but I think for young adults and for other people, like is propelling forward. Like it hasn't stopped in a way that, at least from what I've heard, like has been the case in the past. An incident happens and then we're done. But this one in particular has forced us to say and pay attention to what are the intersections in all of our lives, right? Like, why is it that the places that are most polluted are the places with the people with the lowest wages, which are the places that corporations like Starbucks are saying you can't unionize? Like, we gonna say something about that, right? And we're gonna make sure that these issues are all elevated sort of simultaneously. Because in state houses in particular, which is where, for me as a person who studied government and for this group in particular, the battleground is the state house. It is not the presidency. It is not the US Senate. It is not the United States Congress. It is the state houses are determining whether or not democracy will survive. And they just changed the rules by gerrymandering due to the 2020 census. So over this next decade, I think, yes, there youth. I told people I'm 27 and 97 at the same time.
Right.
And I tried to tell our team, I was like, I'm too old for this, right? Like, we need more 17-year-olds in this work. And I said, we will fail if we don't. And every board that I sit on, I'm like, nope, this isn't gonna work. Like, if it is not 17-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 12-year-olds who are like, oh, I am the one who will be the steward of this planet. And we're taking the little information and knowledge and connection that we have to say, hey, here you go, right? Like, come march with us, come speak up with us, because these are the folks who are going to be in power, right? And will be in power for a little bit longer here as well, but using that to activate a new, as we say, unsettling force that can disrupt the system. But the fierce urgency of now really is now. And it isn't to be an alarmist, it's to be realistic that Dr. Ali said 200,000 people are dying from pollution every year. Those are those people's lives, right? Like, now is the moment for us to remain actively engaged, educating ourselves, but then actively engaged in the movement and in the work and inviting more people to it. Because this table, it's gotta be big enough for everybody, right? There is no room for what the systems we grew up with that said, well, you are from this neighborhood, or you're queer, or you're this, like that. There's zero time for it, including in the Black church. Just crank up the car.
Let's go.
But included in these spaces that have been historically conservative, adopting systems of white supremacy that didn't work for us and haven't worked for us the whole time.
There it is.
Preaching. I don't want to follow that up at all. What I'll say as far as what I see or hope to see in the future is, in particular for youth, is room for the fullness of who they are, all of their creativities. And I think that, again, we talk about intersectionality a lot. It is necessary for the diversity of skills that we all bring, but especially our youth. We need everybody. We need artists, visual performing, we need writers, we need people who are really obsessed with law and policy, thank God for y'all. People who are gardeners and into agriculture, people who are able to bring such a diversity of interests, skill sets, concerns, ideas, again, because we need as much creative thinking around the problem solving that we're doing. And one thing that I'm encouraged by is that it seems like our youth now, more than in our generation and previous generations, are able to really understand that, wow, there's more power in our hands than maybe we recognized before. And so in addition to, them realizing, wow, here's the power that I have, being able to apply everything, all of what they bring to the table to move the movement forward.
Yes. Can we give them a round of applause? I want to thank Amy. I want to thank the Sine Institute. I definitely want to uplift Chris Burning and Matthew Zito, who helped to pull this session together. I want to also call out Will Desmond, Julieta Marino, Robert Roseman, Amaya Jones, Benjamin Robb, and of course, my right and left hand, Christina Barnes. If you could give them a round of applause. Seminar series has been aptly named The Fight for Environmental Justice and Climate Justice in the 21st Century, because that's exactly what we have in front of us. But if we're willing to come together, we can win that fight. I'll leave y'all with two quotes that mean a lot to me. One is from Dr. King. He said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Think about that in relationship to COVID pandemic. Think about it in relationship to the racial injustices that we all continue to have to fight. And think about it in relationship to the climate crisis. No one will escape it if we don't do the work now to address it. Then, of course, President Obama shared with us some really important words. And these folks actually show what I think he meant when he said that you are the change that you've been waiting for. Each and every person in this room is that change if you decide to accept the mission, because it is a mission. It's not a 1 day or a 6 hour thing. It is a set of lifetime commitments to make change not only happen, but for them to stick. But I know you're up to it. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the next generation of 21st century leaders. Thank you all for allowing us to share space. Peace and power.